Okay, so again, welcome to today's session, Spanish for Library Staff, Bridging the Language Barrier. A recorded version of this webinar will be available at a later date after the captions are edited. So keep an eye out for updates on the KYAC listserv. I do want to say before I introduce the presenters that if you would like to participate in the chat for this session, at the bottom of your screen, there is a purple tab that has two triangles. If you click on that, you will see one of your options is a chat bubble. Go ahead and put your comments and your questions inside the chat bubble, and we will be able to ask our presenters your questions and let them know what you have to say. So today we have Christy Moran from the Colorado State Library. She is the Adult Library Services Senior Consultant. And we have Caroline Smith from the South Carolina State Library, and she is the Facilities and Access Consultant. And I am going to let them tell us a little bit about themselves, and then they will be able to start their presentations. So Christy and Caroline, go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for having us today. I'm Caroline Smith. I work at the South Carolina State Library, and I will be sharing a program that we started a few years ago based on Spanish for library staff. And Christy, did you want to say anything else?
Yeah, my name is Christy Moran. My pronouns are she, ella, and I am officially, like I always say, the fancy title is Adult Library Services Senior Consultant. But this is something expanding services to Spanish speakers and really supporting our libraries, and doing that is something that's very close to me and has become a really satisfying part of the gig. So we'll also be sharing what I do in Colorado, which is in large part due to Carolyn's resources and really she's my inspiration. So always very happy to share this.
Thanks, Christy. And I'll share some more background about how I got started in just a second. But before we go into that, I wanted to share our goals for today. It's basically to tell you what we did for our programs in each of our states, and then give you the resources that are free for you to use and adapt if you would like to start a similar program at your own library. And our main focus today is on language learning, but we will also talk about how that language learning piece fits into the bigger picture of language access and equitable library service for Spanish speakers. And we hope to have plenty of time for Q&A. You're free to ask questions during the presentation, and we'll also have time at the end because we really want to hear from you. So I'll start by sharing what I did in South Carolina and give you some context. So here's how I got started. In 2014, I accepted my first librarian rank job after getting my MLIS, and was very excited to be working at a branch where I could, determine the community needs and start to plan my own programs. And what I found was that this branch happened to be in an area with a very rapidly growing and very much underserved Spanish-speaking population. Just as an example, our state average Latino population was around 5% at the time, but this city of North Charleston, where I worked, was 10%, and these schools, the elementary schools in our area, were over 50% Latino, and often with parents who only spoke Spanish or spoke pretty limited English. And so I found myself working the reference desk, and every day I would have someone come in that asked if there was any assistance available in Spanish in the library. And I would have to say no, and then try my best to help them with, using Google Translate, because our library did not have Spanish-speaking staff available to help them. But this experience did motivate me to start trying to learn some Spanish myself. And I will tell you that I went through a awkward stage where I did make a lot of mistakes, but eventually got to where I could communicate more conversationally with patrons, sign them up for library cards and all of that. And it after a few months, it got to where my Spanish was really useful. And combining that language learning piece with also starting to create community partnerships, meeting with community leaders to learn what should the library be doing to better serve this community, what barriers are they facing. And we started to do a lot of programs, a couple of which are pictured here: English classes, there was a school supply drive, all kinds of things. And we did start to see through those efforts the demographics of who was using the library change and begin to start reflecting our community at large. And then fast forwarding to 2017, I started a new job at the South Carolina State Library as inclusive services consultant, which was focused on reducing barriers to library access around the state. And I worked with, and still work with, our 42 county public library systems. And I was able to go and visit these systems, talk with the staff, and notice that many of our libraries were in similar situations. Some of them were aware of this community that they were not reaching, but staff really didn't know where to start. Most of our libraries did not have Spanish-speaking staff, and the staff that were there didn't feel qualified or didn't feel like they had permission to try to engage this community. And so I started in 2018 an informal virtual practice group, a very small group informal program, just to get staff comfortable with basic phrases and start having conversations related to serving Spanish speakers in our communities. And it really grew from there. We repeated the series every year with improvements. It got a little more formal and just started to grow. So here I will share our goals for the program. So the goal is to equip staff with basic Spanish vocabulary and library-related scripts. The goal is not to teach Spanish as, you know, the entire language. We don't spend time on grammar or getting it perfect. I don't do a lot of general vocabulary unless it's things that are really related that you need to know to explain, you know, a library program or something like that. And I am not a Spanish teacher. So we try to keep it pretty simple. But the other goal is increasing staff confidence to engage with Spanish speakers. And this was one of the greatest benefits, I think, of the series, that we did have some people starting with no Spanish knowledge, but a lot of the people that attended actually had a decent amount of Spanish or remembered Spanish from high school or college. They just weren't comfortable using it in a real world conversation. So this was a time for them to get some practice and feedback in a safe environment so that they could then go out and use their Spanish. We also had a lot of conversations about barriers to access, things like, you know, ID requirements for library cards and how to communicate that in a way that is not quite as intimidating to the community, and building cultural competency. So just having more awareness of our community needs. And then here is our program overview. So my series over the years, it became a 6-week series with 1-hour sessions. We met by Zoom because I'm serving the whole state of South Carolina, and sometimes even people out of state have joined our sessions as well. So meeting virtually by Zoom was really our only option. And that had some pros and cons that I can talk about, but it's worked pretty well for us. I do think if someone is trying to start a similar group and maybe at one library system that are all located close together, it could be nice to meet in person and just get a different feel for having those conversations. And some people are more comfortable talking face to face than on Zoom on camera. And it's a little easier to do, one-on-one small group activities sometimes in person, but Zoom did work well for us. My program had a broad reach where there has been so much demand for this program that every time we open it, we tend to get 100 people registering, which is our cap on our Zoom account. And however, a lot of people can't make every session, so I do record the sessions, and we may end up having only about 25, 35, somewhere around there in a live session. That's still a pretty big group to work with, and the goal is to actually give people time on camera to practice. So I'll talk about some of the approaches I use to handle that. Yeah, but every time I open it up, there's a waiting list, lots of registration. I also try to include all levels. So we do have people that have zero experience with Spanish and struggle with the basic, pronunciation and how to make the right sounds for the Spanish letters, all the way to maybe people that grew up in a bilingual household and have some Spanish already. At a pretty good level, but just want to fill in some gaps or get some more practice. I think on average, most of our people were pretty beginners, but had some knowledge, and that was very helpful for them to move forward. So including all levels can be a challenge. One thing I did do in a recent session, since I had a co-host, was to use the Zoom breakout rooms and divide up between our beginners and our more intermediate folks so that we could work on practicing different things, where beginners are more just repeating phrases and getting the practice speaking and getting feedback if they mispronounce something, where the intermediate folks could have more basic conversations already. And then the content, what we did each time, we reviewed a vocabulary list. Our lists were around different themes like circulation or outreach or technology. And then we do reading or speaking practice with a Spanish picture book. I would show the book on the screen, usually with a YouTube video, and the participants would take turns practicing it. I found that was a good way just to focus on the pronunciation and reading and speaking without having to think through what to say. So that worked pretty well. We've had a lot of topical discussions around services and different strategies as well. And I also have been co-hosting the series with native speakers. So I am a Spanish learner. I am not a native speaker, and I can use Spanish in a library environment effectively, but I don't have the depth of knowledge to answer some of the more complex questions that people will ask. I don't have an authentic accent and cultural experience to share. And it has been really nice to co-host it with native speakers from different countries with different accents and with different library experiences. So going to the next slide, here are 6 weekly themes that I use, and there's a QR code that links to my LibGuide, which has all of those vocabulary lists and the slides. They are licensed for reuse with Creative Commons. You can take them, modify them, improve them, and use them yourself if you would like. So lessons learned. I mentioned that there was a whole lot of interest and need, and I realized that I really don't have the capacity myself to meet all of those needs of staff that are trying to better serve their populations. So that is a big part of my motivation with making all these materials open so that more libraries can start their own groups. And the other thing that I am working on is creating some pre-recorded videos that people can watch so that it's not necessarily something that ties me up to host the program, but still fills a need for people that need to review the content. And I did mention before that we record the sessions, and that's kind of a compromise that we made because it is hard for people to schedule a 6-week series and attend every time in many cases. And so I do record it, but I only share the recording with those who registered. So it's not publicly posted online in a place where it will be, searchable forever. And so that at least has made participants a little more comfortable with speaking and being able to make mistakes on camera. So Zoom has its pros and cons, but we're kind of stuck with it since we do cover a large geographical area. I think it's important to be clear about your scope and your limitations. So if someone comes into the program thinking they're going to go from no Spanish knowledge to being completely fluid and conversational, it can be frustrating because language learning takes a very long time. But I think the program has been helpful in raising the confidence level and learning those specific phrases and scripts that are useful in a library setting. And yeah, and we've had some staff that came into the series with a pretty good level of Spanish, but by the time they were done, they were actually attending outreach events and using it with the public and had that confidence. Individual differences in learning is a challenge because we do have so many different levels and people can pick up languages at different rates. Everyone has different opportunities for practice. And sometimes on my evaluations, I would get contradictory feedback. So some people would say, we need a lot more time to practice the vocabulary in the live session, while others would say the practice is a waste of time. And so it's really hard to find the right level for everyone. So my goal is to kind of reduce the size of the group. And I think with a smaller group, it's much easier to tailor the content to their needs, and dividing up into multiple levels is also very helpful. But it's a challenge because, like I said, it's a 6-week series. It can be hard to fit into my schedule to host it that often. Let's see. Look for collaborations with Reforma. So I mentioned that I've co-hosted many of the sessions. My co-hosts were all members of our state's new chapter of Reforma, which is the national organization to promote library services for Latinos and Spanish speakers. And so I would encourage you to reach out to Reforma National. Join Reforma. It's a great network of support. They have a very active listserv. And if your state has a chapter, you can connect more with local people that can provide expertise. But if you don't have a chapter, I've just recently gone through the process of helping to start one. So that's another possibility if you see the need. All right. So what's next for us? We're looking at our current format. I'm hoping to make some self-paced lessons and collaborating with some people from our local Reforma chapter on that. But at the same time, the live sessions are really, let me change the slide. The live sessions are really helpful as well. So I would like to have some kind of combination of maybe not a whole 6-week live session, but an occasional meetup for people to get practice, feedback, and ask their questions. I have been unable to meet all of the demand, so we really hope to see more of these groups springing up in other libraries. And again, libraries can take our materials and adapt them to host their own groups. Okay, and that is all the overview for South Carolina. I will turn it over to Christy to share about Colorado's program.
Thank you, Carolyn. So you're going to see some stuff that's the same, some stuff that's a little different. And I think when I introduced myself, I hopefully did a great job of communicating that so much of what I'm able to do is through inspiration, because one day I put out in a Reforma listserv, does anybody have a Spanish speaking program, like a teaching library staff Spanish program? And Carolyn responded and said, yes, here's all my stuff. Do what you need to do. So I'm very grateful for that. So a lot of what you're going to see is similar, and then there are going to be some differences. So I have a program, I've called it Espanol for Library Folks. That is Spanish for library staff. Very similar to Carolyn, the goal, and it is a goal, is to encourage the practice of Spanish relevant to libraries. I have a very explicit list of this is what it is and this is what it is not. What is the most important to me is that I'm creating a safe space for learning. One of the things that I've encountered personally, like myself, but also encountered when talking to people, especially when I started in the state library, was this: we really want to help our community. We acknowledge that they're speaking a language that we don't speak. I really want to help, but I'm afraid to. I'm intimidated to. I don't have, like, as though some like magical entity of like Latinidad is going to come down and like grant us all with this permission to speak Spanish poorly, right? Like that's what they were waiting for. And that's what we were waiting for. And the reality is that doesn't exist, right? So the best I can do is to create this kind of safe space to make mistakes, to learn some stuff, to practice some stuff, and to walk away going, okay, I'm a little more comfortable trying. And that's just it, right? So it is not a Spanish class or any kind of substitute for formal instruction. I'm a former educator. I was a faculty member, professor. We are not doing any kind of like assessment pre or post. Nobody is completing like assignments toward a capstone project. I'm not breaking down like how to conjugate verbs. Really, 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 there is a space and a place and a need for formal instruction in language. This is not it. Instead, what it is again, not like a cohort, like a community of practice where we talk about language, but through the practice of language in a variety of different ways, and also in conversation, we're allowed to explore kind of the differences between nations of origin, traditions, all sorts of things related to we're able to do as a result of talking about language. What it is also not, is a question I get a lot, is like a course in collection development for Spanish. Look, I know you want to build your Spanish collection. There are definitely ways to do that. We are not going to be talking about what books we should or shouldn't be purchasing in order to do that. So it's a very explicit, this is a community of practice. But anyway, so now to look at the program overview. I started with a 6-week program similar to Carolyn's. We have changed it to an 8-week program. That was based on demand. That was based on people showing up. In other words, if there was demand but nobody was showing up, I would not be doing an 8-week program. But the reality is that people seem to be pretty committed to showing up. We like Carolyn's program. This is a state library program, right? So my goal is to engage people throughout the state, not just in the Denver metro area, which is where, like, frankly, everyone thinks everyone lives in Colorado. And there are very many people who live in the Denver metro area. And also the vast majority of us do not. And so it's really important to be able to create a space where everybody can meet. So it offers a lot of opportunities for a community building that is beyond just like who's in your local area, which I think is really important. So we meet once weekly via Zoom for 60 minutes. I, like Carolyn, I have a co-facilitator. So I am what I call first language Spanglish. I am Miami Cuban. My Spanish is, I think I think my Spanish is actually horrible, but people seem to think my Spanish is fine, including native Spanish speakers. I don't agree. But what I do know is that Spanish is not my dominant language. It is not my first language. It is not my, well, it is my first language, but it's not my strongest language. There's a lot of gaps that I can't possibly fill. And as a result, it was really important for me to engage somebody who is a native speaker, who is working in our libraries, to be a part of both the co-creation of this and the facilitation of this. So my co-facilitator is Nadia Rendon. She is the Spanish Services Coordinator out of Denver Public Library. She is right now the past president of Reforma Colorado chapter. I'm the current secretary of the Reforma Colorado chapter, which I think Carolyn is too, because these are just the cards were dealt. So we have a small group. Right now, I'm currently in a cohort in the middle, and I have 20 people, 20. I originally registered 25 people registered. I accepted 25 people this time around, and I think we're just shy of, we're between, I think we're 20 to 25 at this point. I get a lot more interest than I can possibly meet. I maintain a very small cohort. So I just told you my cap was 25. The goal is to split into groups of 2 based on self-assessed fluency. So we have in my interest form that I put out, I get 100 people interested, and that's just not going to fly in one go. So people are also asked to self-identify honestly what they think their language of Spanish fluency is. And then from there, I split, so I kind of assign us into 2 groups. And the first week or so, the first week, we kind of accept or expect that people will go, oh, I said I didn't speak Spanish really well, but relative to the group that we have now, not, in the beginner group, actually I'm a bit better. So that's actually happened in this go round. So there's a beginner group, and much like Carolyn, we do library terms and we do picture book reading. The more fluent group meets with Nadia, and they do topical Spanish conversation. So it's topical and related to work. They're using library terms, whether they're talking about their day-to-day library work in Spanish, and they fully speak in Spanish. So we're in the space together. Over the first less than 5 minutes, we're kind of greeting each other. And after that, I split us up into 2 groups. Nadia has been incredibly generous since we started doing this, that throughout the week, through every week, she will offer a drop-in half-hour practice, one for the beginner group and one for the more advanced group. Sometimes I show up, so I will show up to ones tomorrow, but I may not show up, right? But Nadia does. And in those times, people are allowed the opportunity to an even smaller one-on-one space practice. Oh, switch to the next slide. So my lessons learned and my outlook are very similar to Carolyn's. I am centering my program entirely on these driving benefits and values, which is you're not going to learn Spanish in my sessions at all. What you may learn some terms, but what I need you to walk away with, what my goal is that every single person who is a part, and this includes me, right? Every single person who is a part of this, we walk out more confident in our ability to serve and more hopeful in our kind of ability to do that. I want us all to feel like we have the permission to make mistakes, that we are empowered in being a part of a learning journey that is similar and reflective of the learning journeys, of the language learning journeys of the people that we're serving in our libraries, right? Irrespective of what language they speak dominant, many people are showing up at our libraries without English as a first language. And so it's really imperative that we get to share in that experience and see ourselves in that and see ourselves as a part of that process. I mentioned that I need people from all over the state to participate. And one of the reasons that I want that to happen is so that we get a community, for real, a real community. It is scary to do something poorly It is really scary to do something poorly around people you don't know. And that is everything in our lives, everything in our work. And so the networking opportunities that are afforded through a small group practice is really important. Cultural competence is something I think that comes naturally when we're talking about linguistic kind of diversity, right? The only thing that many of us share in our Latinidad, and not all of us, but many of us, is the fact that our language is Spanish. If you think about every single person who speaks English, let alone every single person who speaks English in the United States alone, we're all experiencing different backgrounds, different identities, different traditions, different wants and desires. And all of those are different cultures, right? And so it's a matter of also looking at our cultures kind of in this beautiful spectrum of all these colors, right? And we get to do that by practicing language together and then feeling the kind of safety of being able to ask questions. Twice annually works for me, despite an outsized interest. I do this 8-week program twice. I do September, October, and then I do again January and February. And I bet you if I wanted to make this my entire job, I could totally do it. It is wonderful and I love it. And also I have so many things to do. I cannot possibly do this all the time. This is just folded into a bigger picture of my responsibility. Something actually I need to listen to my episode today that I have ongoing is a Club de Escucha, which is a listening club of a Spanish language podcast. It's called Radio Ambulante. All of us have access to it. It's fantastic. If you are a Spanish speaker and you want to really feel seen and to see and to experience and to practice maybe your listening fluency, I think Radio Ambulante is like a fantastic resource. And I encourage you to use that. I'm also piloting Moodle as an LMS, as a learning management system, but mostly not for the learning part, but for the fora, so that people can talk to one another. Hit or miss on that. So I don't know what the future of that will look like, but in any event. And so now I'm going to check the chat, but now we're going to talk a little bit about our takeaways. So Carol and I both do this and what we kind of recommend. Everything shown you, Carol and I both work for our respective state libraries, right? So my library constituency, as I often say, is I'm a librarian for librarians and library staff, right? Those are my people. But you, more than likely, are in a specific location and are serving a local population. Moreover, you have a whole team of people, whether it's 3, I just went to a library to visit and it's literally 3 people, and then another one that's 1.5 people, and that half is actually the one person who works at a different library, right? So I have a lot of rural libraries. But chances are you have a local or regional, right? Network of people. And this is something that both your public community, so the people who live in your communities, and the people who work in your communities can really avail themselves of. This is super DIY plug and play. Carolyn gave me resources and most of them worked, not all of them worked. And so I zhuzhed it and I made it so that it works for me. You can do the same thing. And so our recommendation is something like 60 to 90 minutes. Weekly seems like a lot, but let me tell you, I literally just told you that if I did this all year, I would have people all year. Weekly enables you to really build relationships with people and not lose that sense of urgency. Plus, depending on how long you do it, for how much time, people are allowed to drop off and come in as they're able, right? So I have people who've had deaths in the family and had to leave for 2 weeks and then come back, and that they still felt safe. It's still the same group of people in the room with them. And we get to really build on that. My recommendation is to really be explicit that this is not a class unless very specifically it is in your context. And if it is, please pay somebody to teach that class unless you are a language instructor. Teaching Spanish is wild. There's a lot going on. And if you are teaching a formal class, I hope I hope that you know how to do that. Carolyn and I have very different size options for our different size versions of our programs. I love a small class. There are some drawbacks though, right? How about outsized interest? Carolyn has a huge class. There are some drawbacks to that, right? There's a bit of a personal connection that gets lost. So really, it's going to be a kind of plug and play dependent on your context and what works for you. If it's 3 of you, dude, it's going to be 3 amazing people on a journey together. If it's 300 of you, you're going to need to kind of figure out how you can make that work. And I think Carolyn and I both at this point kind of do a level check, right? I found, and I think Carolyn also found, that if we all have this big mix of varying fluencies, the people, for example, who are beginners and already like incredibly intimidated will feel really intimidated and really feel out of place in a group where the most expressive people are much more fluent than them. Even if when I hear them, I'm like, what are they saying? Like, that is choppy. To someone who's just learning, that is, right? It's all relative. And the same thing where I had people who were really fluent. I started with just one group. I had people who were really fluent relative to the rest of the group who were like, I don't want to be a part of this. I thought I was going to be able to practice Spanish, but I know all these words that you're teaching us. And so that's how I ended up with 2 groups, right? It was actually the more fluent folks who were like, this is not for me. And I think being able to give options is really key and really key to the whole experience. And then at least for me, having them all tie into the bigger space together is really powerful. We are kind of very short on time. I want to make sure to take questions, but I show this slide. I think it's in a lot of different presentations with like kind of varying, you know, instead of try options. Carolyn and I are both incredibly committed to the idea of cultural competency. I mentioned we share a language at best, and not all of us do. So what does that mean? Well, that means that within all of our experiences is all this richness and diversity that sometimes gets overlooked in service of the language. So my challenge to you is to, instead of thinking bilingual, think bicultural. And then I have this like asterisk there because somebody was very keen to point out to me that actually we're not talking about just 2. Many people who are within the within Latinidad, within Latine or Spanish-speaking community, actually speak many languages, right? And really a lot of us do too. I was from Miami. I have Haitian Creole friends who speak English, French, and Haitian Creole. These are 3 separate languages, right? And 2 of them are from one place. And we often overlook the kind of diversity and variety within Latinidad in service of the language. It's really important to point out that with promotion, we do a lot of kind of like, we just advertise, right? We like say things out. And in this community and these communities, it's really outreach that's going to be successful. And outreach is different in that you are more embedded in a space that is not yours. And I mean, is not yours as a library. It is going out to community spaces where people already are who maybe don't even know who the library is and who you are. And it's scary and it's sometimes uncomfortable and sometimes you don't feel welcome. So now flip that and imagine what it's like for like any one of those people to come into your building, right? And so really relationship building, which is the key here, is outreach, not promotion. And I swear to you that within, like, I don't even live in some of the cities that I'll go visit. And within a 5-minute conversation in broken Spanish with like some people, I'm invited over their homes for cafecito. Like, that's not because they like me personally all that much and I'm so cool. No, it's because I went out of my way. And I think Carolyn understands this feeling too, right? You just go outside and they're like, I can't believe you're here. Let me tell you everything. Right? Like, you are now a part of my family. And that's a result of outreach, not promotion. And then, of course, don't just try it again. And like, be the lady or the guy who shows up and knocks on the door again and again and again, up until the point where someone says, oh my God, what is this gringo doing here? This is the 8th time that she's shown up at my house. Like, and I don't mean please don't show up to random people's houses, but my point, like, show up to these meetings, show up to these communities, show up to these people, and show them that you're committed, right? Because the commitment and the care is really the center of the relationship building piece.
Okay. And I will jump in quickly to wrap it up so that we have some time for questions. I think Christy covered most of this already, but one thing that I always tell my groups is that I had no special qualifications to learn Spanish and work with this community. I was just the reference librarian, and that was my community, and I did my best to figure it out. And it worked pretty well. So I think every staff member plays a part. There's not learning basic scripts is not a substitute for having a bilingual or bicultural, native speaker on staff. But at the same time, if you're the librarian, you don't want to just wait for that person to be hired and do nothing in the meantime. And if you are lucky enough to have bilingual staff, you also don't want to place all the burden of serving an entire underserved population on one person. And you want to do the best to support them yourself as well, and spread out some of that work. And that will also go a long way to making patrons feel more comfortable no matter who is there at the desk to help them. And so that language learning, like we mentioned, is one part of a bigger strategy of advocacy and increasing library services, regardless of what language you speak. And I would encourage libraries, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You may be starting with nothing and move up to starting to use Google Translate and, at least communicate basic information. And then you can keep working up from there as you build relationships and build your staff skills as well. We have some resources that we will share with you so that you can take these materials and make them your own. And with that, we would love to hear your questions.
If you have questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask out loud if you're not comfortable typing. Otherwise, feel free to type as well.
Also, just heads up, I am adding to our chat any minute now the PDF of this presentation. All of the live links are on the PDF slides and or all the PDF pages. Yeah, I'm going to share them all. Hopefully it lets me. Oh no, it's not. It's sharing them here. That's not what I wanted to do.
The PDF is actually also available in the Blackboard Collaborate shell. So when people close out of the presentation today, they will be available as well in the course shell screen that they see under PDFs and slides.
Excellent. Okay, then I won't reach.
Thank you so much.
But so you guys will have access to all that. I think Carol and I both, our links are in the chat as well, and all of our content. Please take it. Like, we are librarians. We are not holding any of this back. Among the things, and you saw, I have these flashcards that are just our library terms in Spanish. Like, I literally am currying some of them out, but you are more than welcome to print them out, to use them for games. It is what it is.
And let us know how it goes. Christy and I have presented this for a couple different groups and conferences, and we love hearing when you are able to, get out and use Spanish yourself or start some kind of practice group in your library. And if you find activities that are working really well for your group, share it with us as well, because I'm constantly trying to improve my series when I have
For
time.
sure. I should say we have had people who have used this for a local setting. So Garfield County Libraries is in Colorado. They're doing this like themselves. They have a version of this exactly like we recommend, like something small and local where they can take ownership of the content and the community building. I think that's wonderful. I think everyone is ready for lunch.
Yeah,
Well,
feel free to
Caroline and Christy,
contact.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
I think our emails are shared already, so feel free to contact us afterwards as well.
great. Well, I wanted to thank you both for being here today for KYAC, and just so everyone knows, I'm going to end recording.